the big thing for me is we can have all the data we want, but until you turn that into information, turn that into knowledge, produce insights from that knowledge, you can't make impact. And ultimately for value, the value proposition with clients is all about impact. It's not about just collecting data.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Futurex, a podcast by Martin Hearn, Event Director, Futurebuild, and co-host Dr. Oliver Jones, Research Director at Ryder Architecture. Futurex will bring together some of the brightest minds and some of the most disruptive thinkers and innovators to transform the construction industry and build a Futurex community of like-minded people that can begin to make a real change. We really hope you enjoy the series.
Hello and welcome to Futurex. I'm Martin Hearn, Event Director at Futurebuild, and once again, very pleased to be joined by my co-host, Dr. Oliver Jones at Ryder Architecture. Oliver, got 3 guests this week.
Oh, it's a big one today. We're shaking things up. We've got Graham Kelly joining us, Managing Director from the BIM Academy, who's going to give us a bit of an industry insight into how data is being used to drive climate action and climate change and to accelerate us towards addressing our 2050 goals. So some really interesting insights there from industry. And then we've got the guys from Zero Next, who it was such a great conversation. It was so fantastic to see that there's such passion and such energy around climate action, but that it's got a backbone of data that's driving it.
Absolutely. Zero Next is an offshoot of the Zero Construct activist movement, really making waves at the moment. Just done quite a provocative talk at Digital Construction Week. We've got 2 of their founders. We've got Tasha Greenfield, and she's at Natural Building Systems. And we've got Giulia Papi at innDex as well. So, data is a massive theme this week, and the use of digital tools in driving that net zero agenda. And I know at BIM Academy, we talk about 2 big projects that you're quite involved in at Ryder as well.
Yeah, so Graham's going to cover a project called Project Aquila, which is around how we make plant and site equipment way more efficient with a really intelligent but very simple, scalable solution to produce almost a national digital resourcing twin for plant and site equipment that helps us reduce emissions. And then there's a project that I've been way more closely involved with over the last 5 years, which is around sensor integration into social housing and into our buildings so that we can better understand the energy performance, the environmental performance, and its impact on occupants and occupants' behavior. So super excited for Graham to tell us a bit more about those projects. Let's get him on.
Brilliant.
Hey, Graham, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Oh, very good, mate. Very good. And it's good to have you on. I think just to make everyone aware of why we've got you guys on the show, we've got Zero Next, a really interesting interview with Zero Next, a young professionals climate network who are really pushing the use of data in the work that they're doing and the need to monitor and baseline in order to improve. And I thought it was a fantastic opportunity to introduce the Futurex listeners to BIM Academy, a sister company of Ryder, and the work that you guys have done, particularly some of the really interesting project around using data to reduce carbon emissions on the likes of Project Aquila, and maybe even some of the work that we've done together on sensor integration into buildings to improve environmental performance by using data and harvesting data from sensors within buildings. So, Graham, before we kick off and you tell us a bit about those projects, just tell us a little bit about yourself. What did you study? Where you're from? How did you get to the position that you're in?
Yeah, thanks, Ollie. In terms of myself, went to Loughborough University to do a degree in construction management. Fascinated by how we build buildings all over the world, and the degree gave me a real insight into that. I was, I suppose, unfortunate enough to leave uni in 2008, 2009, right smack bang in the middle of the recession, complete meltdown of the construction industry. So really struggled to sort of get a job at that point, which allowed me to sort of reflect a little bit on what I was genuinely sort of interested in. And off the back of that, went back to university. So think I was at university for good 10 years in the end, doing a PhD looking at how buildings change over time, which I think for me was absolutely fascinating to look at how, you know, our architectural design profession tend to concentrate on new builds rather than focus on, you know, learning lessons from their own past buildings. So I did the PhD was really about how we produce better feedback for the design profession to make better adaptable buildings, design better adaptable buildings moving forward. And I suppose that's where, you know, data and sustainability came in to the passion as well, in the sense that ultimately we can collect all sorts of data around our buildings, and if we mine that in the right way and ask the right questions of that data, you know, we can make really impactful insights into what that looks like. So that sort of started the passion, and at the end of near the end of that PhD, there was a really obvious opportunity around adding feedback to visual mechanisms, 3D models, floor plans, you know, stuff that designers use every day. So I think one of the key things that came out of the PhD was when we do look at existing buildings and do post-hoc community evaluations and all sorts of, everything's a report at the end of it, and ultimately no one's got time or energy to read these reports, and what we need to do is create visual sort of feedback around, you know, that people can explore. So there's loads of stuff around knowledge management, loads of stuff around you know, how we best do that and create that visual impact. And that's when I started looking at BIM. So that was, you know, 2011, 2012, as it was sort of in its infancy in terms of the sort of world that we live in now, and started looking at the opportunities to look at how we attach data to models to make better design decisions moving forward. And that's when I was fortunate enough to start working for BIM Academy in a research role, looking at how we use information management, BIM, to better operate our buildings. So again, it was all about the operation of the building, all about buildings in use. So I joined BIM Academy 2012, was doing that research role, very fortunate to go around the country, really speaking to some experts at that time about BIM and FM, because BIM and FM was really in its infancy. 9 months into that, opportunity came up to apply or go for a role at the Sydney Opera House, looking at how they use BIM to support their FM. So it's basically exactly what I'd been doing for sort of nine months, and then a bit about the PhD as well. So BIM Academy applied for that. We're very fortunate to win that work, and that really set the course for my career ultimately, in the sense that I went over there for 4 months, really understood what they did now, the systems they had in place, the data that they were collecting, how they were managing that a hugely exciting but complex building, and put in place a specification for a system that would improve the way that they manage that building. And then we've kind of replicated that throughout. And so since then, we've, you know, a lot of our consultancy work's been about really understanding client need and client value, because the big thing for me is we can have all the data we need, we want, but until you turn that into information, turn that into knowledge, you know, produce insights from that knowledge, you can't make impact. And ultimately, for value, the value proposition of clients is all about impact. It's not about just collecting data.
You guys have had some pretty big clients on the books as well over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you know, looking back at 2012, we're potentially a bit of a niche industry, but we've built a fantastic brand and name in supporting, you know, clients all over the world, from Lego to the Royal Household, to House of Parliament, to the Hong Kong Hospital Authority, to, you know, M+ Museum in Hong Kong. So yeah, we've been really fortunate that BIM and how we manage our information better in a digital form has taken us around the world, and we've been able to support clients all over the world in starting to improve what they do, and that's so there's I guess that's a little bit about what I've been doing, what I've been up to.
Cool. And when I joined Ryder in my role, I think you guys were really kicking off with Project Aquila, and we'd done some work on sensor integration together before, and we'll come on to that. But tell us a bit about the data that was used to drive sustainable reduction in carbon emissions on Project Aquila.
Yeah, absolutely. So Project Aquila stands for an eagle-eye view of site. Ultimately, the idea behind that, and we've done a couple of funded research projects through Innovate UK with Aquila, is that the plant and equipment on site is hugely inefficient, and on large infrastructure sites can cost up to 50% of the total project value is in plant and equipment. On top of that, plant and equipment is a huge emitter of fossil fuels and carbon into our atmosphere. 7% of all NOx levels from London, and you think about the traffic in London, comes from construction of plant and equipment. So huge emitter, and that's just in London. So the idea behind Aquila was, how do we improve the productivity utilization of plant and equipment on site to make the overall use of this plant and equipment much less, and therefore emit much less. Because before we get to the ability to use electric plant, which is a fair way off based on the size of the batteries you need to run a 20-30 ton excavator for 12 hours a day. How do we sort of basically maximize the utilization of that plant equipment? So what we did, and we went around the houses looking at different ways of doing this, but what we ultimately landed on was the use of an IoT device. And in this case, it was a mobile phone. Mobile phone is the cheapest way to get GPS, accelerometer, and gyroscopic data in the same place. And obviously, mobiles are sold all over the world, so the scale of economies there is fantastic in terms of getting all that at a very low cost. So it was basically about taking a mobile phone, creating an application on that, putting that into every cab of plant equipment on a site, and then linking that up to a dashboard that would dictate and tell the site manager what plant equipment was working on, and then linking that to the project program, and also linking that to a 3D model of the site. So they had a contextual, again, visualization of where that plant equipment was on site. And it was really about trying to make the complex simple. It was about trying to give the power in the hands of the site manager. A couple of quotes from that was, if I could look at a dashboard on a computer and see where the red alerts were versus green, that was everything was good to go, it would save them an awful lot of time driving around site on radios, checking on the guys in the cabs and checking on what they were doing. Also, just really simple stuff like idle times, behavior change of the equipment operators, trying to replan. So planning on large infrastructure sites tends to be, start with a macro level, and then they tend to do a weekly plan of what's happening. But there's no real flexibility and agility around how they do that. But giving them, very, very near real time results of where all their plant equipment is, what it's working on, whether it's working or idle or off, allows them to make really agile decisions on what happens on site. So all of this was around building up, improving productivity, and therefore reducing idling time, reducing those emissions that when they weren't needed on site, and ultimately trying to improve the speed of that site. So we focused on sort of 3 different areas, which was construction traffic logistics, which was looking at average speed, average haul time, percentage of idle time, percentage of efficiency, and then it was monitoring the program performance, so linking all that to the program, and then managing a whole fleet. So again, something like HS2, the estimates are they're sort of 500 dumper trucks short, and they're not 500 dumper trucks short, but they are. It appears that way because the utilization rate's down at 30%, and there's a pooling of dumper trucks sitting with different contractors, and there's no way of sharing them. There's no mechanisms for doing that. So there's loads of redundancy, loads of duplication. So it's really about trying to how do you sort of manage that on really complex sites, and the only way you do that is through that data application and bringing that to the fore in the dashboard, and trying to make that as simple as possible to move that forward. So it was a research project. We're trying at the moment for a bit more funding to look at how we commercialize this product moving forward, because we've already proven that there's a significant amount of impact and value that can be made through just this data that we're getting from that project.
And in terms of it's really encouraging, the results. I mean, I've seen the results coming through on Aquila. The cost savings huge as well on something like that. If you look at HS2, which national infrastructure projects tend to go wildly over budget, so it's a no-brainer in terms of me, and the use of this almost sort of national plant digital twin for large-scale national infrastructures, and being able to sort of intelligently resource those kind of projects from multiple suppliers. It just seems like the logical next step that we need to do. And the benefit of doing that is that, like you say, there's a clear carbon reduction because we're being way more efficient in the plant and site equipment. So I think it's a great example of how data can really drive and accelerate us towards addressing the climate emergency. In terms of some of the other projects you guys have worked on, let's jump onto the sensor one, because that's pretty close to my heart in terms of some of the stuff that you guys have been doing with that. Really interested in the fact that it also monitors internal environmental performance and internal air quality as well. So give us a little potted history of that as well, Graham.
Yeah, absolutely. So we started a research project 2017. We intelligently called it Smart Connected Buildings, generally because we couldn't think of a small title. But that was working with Your Homes Newcastle, which are a housing association in the northeast of England, and National Energy Foundation, looking at how we could support landlords, but ultimately vulnerable tenants within housing associations, and improve the occupant well-being within those spaces. So we at the time put in 60 sensors into some flats in just north of Newcastle, and they were measuring internal air quality, energy consumption, so both electric and gas, humidity, light, movement, basically everything that we could get our hands on with the sensors that we had at the time. And the idea behind that building, 13% of social tenants are fuel poor, and this is way before the cost of living crisis. That's only going to increase. The housing associations were never sure about the quality of the buildings that they were being handed over. So that performance gap piece that we I'm sure you've talked about before around design performance versus actual performance. Your Homes Newcastle, which is relatively small housing association compared to some of the larger ones down south, 27,000 homes in the northeast and beyond. They spend about £500,000 a year just on mold repair, and so mold it is ultimately based on poor internal environment, high humidity, damp, that kind of thing. and potentially cold. So there was loads of stuff around, cold homes quadruple the maintenance cost for landlords. So there was this real like pull and push. So landlords need to save money. They're reactive to loads of maintenance, and their tenants aren't getting the best quality homes that they could have. And so what we were looking at in that space, and the data that we pulled was absolutely fascinating. In terms of the drop off in the temperature of the homes as soon as the heating went off. Therefore, they're not as well insulated as possibly specified. And there's loads of sort of instances of how we could improve the occupant well-being. So we've sort of taken all of the learning from that, and we've started almost a self-study of some of our office buildings within Ryder and BIM Academy. So we started with Cooper Studio, our head office in Newcastle, really just doing a bit of analysis around, yes, internal air quality as well, but again around electricity and gas use, and we quite crude in the way that we did this to start with. We took a metering data every half hour within it, but it showed some unbelievable sort of insight into what we're doing. And again, we're the first to hold our hands up and say, look, we were using way too much energy and still are with regards to our annual profiles. We did it really interestingly as well. We did the comparison between 2019, 2020, and 2021. So there was some real stark differences. Obviously, no one was in the office in 2020, April 2020. We did a study then, but we were still up at 2021 kilowatt hours during between half four in the afternoon and 8:30 at night. And it's like, why? But I think the key again is, until you get those insights, until you get collect the data, start to extrapolate it, start to visualize it, you don't see that. We made some changes to the BMS, which was the obvious opportunity that was there, but then that's reduced the peaks, but almost increased the baseline. So again, there's more shuffling and more tweaks that we can do within that space. So what we try to do is utilize the data there to improve the sort of baseline around energy use. What we're trying to do now is link that again to a digital twin of the office, looking at then around the insights that we can get through visualizing that data ultimately in what we're doing. So that's the sort of next step is to take the learning from smart connected buildings, take the learning that we're getting from the energy consumption and the data we're collecting there, and then combining that into a digital twin of the office. We'll then roll that out to the other offices in the UK and further afield to try and improve our energy consumption so that we can hit our net zero target for operational and net zero by 2025.
It sounds like you guys really need to hook up with the guys from Zero Next and track some of the work that they're doing as well, or even contribute some case studies, because there's definitely a groundswell around this use of data to drive climate action. And you guys have been working in that space for so long now, it's second nature, but I think everybody's beginning to wake up to, if you don't measure it, how the hell can you improve it? So some really encouraging steps being made. Graham, just finally, while we've got you, it'd be great to just hear your take on sort of the future of national digital twins, and how is that going to improve things in terms of sustainability? How is that going to shake out? How would you like to see it shake out? What do you want to see from the future of BIM and national digital twins in the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a fantastic initiative. I think it's a huge initiative, and the premise around it, around the Gemini principles and having open, transparent data and that shareable data and making sure that anyone, security allowing, I suppose, can exploit the data for good, and that for me is the crux of it. When you say national digital twin, everyone thinks you can have a digital twin of the whole of the UK. That's not what it's about. It's about interoperability. It's about, you know, the connection of lots of different things. So Aquila using the same standards and data standards as other digital twins that are happening, you know, for Northumbria Water, for instance, or, you know, all sorts that's happening around the world and around the UK. So that interoperability and that is absolutely key. The big soapbox for me is about value and about value proposition. And, you know, we've myself and you, Ollie, have seen, you know, over the years and speaking to various people, loads of people collecting data now, not necessarily sure what to do with it. We need to close that gap between, you know, just collecting data and the solutions we're trying to inform. So really easy for Ryder. We want net zero by 2025 operationally. How do we go about this? Well, we need to collect our energy consumption. Really easy from a use case within Aquila. We want to reduce the duplication, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then you go about answering that problem with the collection of specific data. So I think that for me is the crux of all of this is about understanding the problems you're trying to solve, understanding the value before just jumping in and collecting data.
Graham, it's clear that, you know, we've got the digital tools, you know, to make a real difference, but across the industry, adoption, you know, is still, you know, a struggle. Right? You know, we talk a lot about the barriers to specification, the barriers to bringing in new innovations. What are you seeing at the moment, the sort of the key barriers to, you know, mass adoption going forward?
It's a lot about the standard barriers around cost and time and value proposition and I suppose demonstrating and proving that value proposition to clients who you know, inevitably are already short of cash, already you know, fighting fires, already reacting to what they're doing. You know, there's something like a 15 billion pound backlog in maintenance in the NHS. You know, and you know, when you've got that size backlog of maintenance, it's very difficult to pull your head out and start to understand, you know, how you solve that. And so we're, again, big push on we're working with loads of NHS trusts around, you know, how do they use data to improve what they're doing with their asset management and reducing that backlog, because at the minute it's so reactionary, it's so focused on, you know, if something breaks, fix it, rather than, you know, preventative maintenance, planned maintenance, you know, taking data to understand that. So, and that's going to take time to turn around, because the issue is you've got to react to issues to make sure that you're, you know, keeping people healthy in hospital environments. But we need a little bit of a helicopter view to start to explore how we use data to improve that those outcomes.
And you showed this by just the two, you know, different projects that you talked about, that, you know, we're using digital tools now on such a wide range of, you know, projects or solutions. You mentioned, you know, getting to net zero by 2025, it's only 3 years away. What's the next big thing? What's really in digital space going to have the largest impact within the built environment?
So I think the next, and it's to be honest, it's what we've been talking about today, is the integration of IoT live data, near real-time data, with the buildings, the infrastructure, the assets that come with it, to make better and more intuitive decisions on what we do. That for me is the real connection. And that's, you know, you can talk about blockchain and metaverse and all of these things, but they're just enablers for, you know, better insights into what we're doing. And I think for me, the cheaper sensors get and the more accessible they get, and that's going to be something we're working with, you know, various developers and FM companies that are you know, deploying thousands and thousands of sensors now, because their ESG data is so important to them that is you know, it's the next big step. And I think that's actually what's really interesting about that, is that it's the funds that are asking for that, because they have the targets. The FM layer in the middle that is operating this building isn't quite in that headspace yet. So what I think is going to be really interesting over the next 3 years or next 3 to 5 years is how that FM space then starts to utilize that data, and who puts their head above the parapet to say they're a data-driven FM organization. You know, there's a couple of smaller ones out there at the minute, but the big FM companies, huge, 500,000 employees, et cetera, these guys are still not in that space where they're using data to improve how they operate people's buildings. And if they're getting pushed from their funds down, I'm sure some of them will start to put their head up above the parapet.
I think that ties in perfectly with some of the stuff that we talked to the Zero Next guys about as well. That if we don't take leadership and take action in gathering our own data to baseline and monitor and improve, then it's going to come from outside of our industry. It's going to come from the big funds that you're talking about, the people who are really focused, on the billions of pounds being spent around ESG and invested around ESG with all of those targets. And it's going to come from insurers and other big players outside of the market. So I think it's absolutely critical. I totally agree with your points there, Gray. I think it's absolutely critical that we start to integrate more of those devices, and we start to sort of monitor and baseline all of our buildings, just to get those insights and to make our buildings much more efficient in the way that they operate. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. It won't be the last time, I'm sure. There's loads more that we could probably talk about, but we'll crack on and go and meet the Zero Next team and have a conversation with them as well. But thanks for turning up, Graham.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me. Really enjoy what you're doing. And yeah, always happy to talk about how we improve our built environment.
How do people get in touch with the BIM Academy or find you guys?
If you go to www.bimacademy.global, all the details are on there. And yeah, always happy to have a conversation about these sorts of things.
Awesome. All right, mate. See you soon.
Thank you.
Hi, guys. Thanks for joining us. So we're joined with Tasha and Giulia. Tasha, tell us a bit about yourself.
Hey, so I am currently working at Natural Building Systems, and my background is in architecture. I'm training to be an architect, but I've always been really interested, I guess, in disrupting construction, which sounds a bit silly for an architect to not want to build or disrupt construction. But in my current job, we are essentially reforming construction and looking at designing a sustainable building system. And through that, I got in touch with Zero, or they got in touch with us, actually. And we then ended up building Zero's stand at Digital Construction Week earlier this year. And I think it was through that we then started Zero Next, which I'm now co-leading with Giulia.
That's a nice link to Giulia. Giulia, how about yourself?
Hi, guys. Thank you for having us, first of all. And unlike Tasha, my background is not construction related at all. So I did economics and statistics in my undergrad, and I'm currently studying to become a data scientist at UCL, so London based as well. I work with innDex, which is actually disrupting the construction industry. So it's a project management platform, end to end for the whole supply chain. We're driving change every day. We're striving to change the industry for the better, really. And this ties in quite well with Zero, because as we know, we're very, especially me in my mission with innDex, I am all things data. I know that what we can't measure, we can't change, and what we can't manage can't also be changed. And we know that as an industry, we need to demand more and set more ambitious targets for ourselves, and that includes carbon and the transition towards the net zero carbon.
You've mentioned, disruption quite a lot there, and it's a common theme we're hearing at the moment. Those the need to disrupt the built environment and the construction industry, in particular. And I know on the notes you gave us, you described yourselves as classy activists. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Giulia, do you want to go, or shall I launch in with Giulia? That's Giulia's title for us, which I love.
Yeah, I mean, we call ourselves activists because the current demographics of the construction industry are not taking us too seriously at the moment, because obviously we're young, with fresh minds, new to the industry, maybe with a couple years of experience each. And we've got loads of good ideas, but we just need a way that someone can listen to us. And I feel like this is the perfect introduction for Zero Next as well. We're relatable, we're nice people. We're just trying to make a change, because eventually we're going to be the future leaders of the industry, and we're going to have to work with what's being done now. So we want change early enough for us to be able to save something.
Tell us a little bit more then. What do you guys stand for? What's it all about?
So I think Zero was started 1 or 2 years ago by James and Jonathan. And when Zero started, it was essentially a group of friends who wanted a better industry, who wanted to be building zero carbon buildings. Lots of the people who are involved with Zero are quite in the kind of digital space, and are all working on quite big, quite high carbon projects. And I think gradually they started realizing that it wasn't good. So that kind of formed, and then gradually, so when I got involved with Zero, I think I was probably the youngest member, and I was involved in conversations. We had a leadership discussion, and I was busy Googling C-suite in the background, trying to figure out what the C-suite was. And it's completely obvious, but actually it made me realize that there's a real space within the kind of Zero sphere for a kind of safe space for Zero Next for young professionals in the construction industry who can discuss what the C-suite is and talk about things like that, and the issues that young professionals are facing within the construction industry. And I think that Zero is a massive group and has people of all ages. And we were really keen when we set Zero Next up for it not to be a separate group, but for it to be part of Zero, but to be a little bubble where we can just chat and kind of get to know each other on a kind of more informal level.
How many are you now, and what locations are you active in, or is it global?
So Zero is massively global. I think this is where I'm going to quote James. I think we've got 400 members, or over 400 members in 40 countries, and it's probably growing. I'm involved with the kind of membership lists, and every day we have so many new people who want to be involved. Zero Next is a little bit smaller and slightly more UK based at the moment, although we do have members in other countries. I think we've probably got about 25 members, but we probably have, in our weekly meetings, they're slightly smaller. And kind of actually something that we found is really interesting is trying to find a time where young people, because actually it's harder to get time off work to do a meeting. And I know that within architecture particularly, being able to say, can I have an hour off work to chat about zero carbon construction isn't a conversation that people are having. So we've now settled to after work meetings every 2 weeks.
We've also got Zero Next Australia, which is the next big thing. We're going to work on launching it probably the next week. We've got a few members already. And as Tasha said, we're still trying to figure out a time that suits everybody, because being so widespread across the globe can be a problem when it comes to meeting.
Yeah. So you've been going for about 6 months as Zero Next, and I know you've already made quite an impact. It'd be good to sort of hear some of the things you have done. I know you made quite a splash at Digital Construction Week recently as well.
Yes, so we kind of Zero has started putting us forward as the activating members of Zero, and I think it's really interesting listening to your previous podcast about positive activism, because I think a lot of our meetings and conversations are kind of quite, God, this is really hard work. Why is no one listening to us on our kind of zero carbon mission? And our previous talks, about fuck roadmaps, act now. What are we doing? And I think our conversations are moving towards more solution-based thinking, because actually lots of the people we're talking to know what's going on with the planet. If people aren't blind to it. And so the kind of, activating talks that we've been doing, where we're kind of showing people what's going on and telling them to act now, I think we're going to move towards a kind of much more positive, solution-based thinking that's influenced by, Zero also creating a playbook, and I think it'll be more influenced by the knowledge that's shared within Zero.
I think there's a feeling of that, isn't there, at the moment across the whole built environment. I think the recent CCC report talked about, we've done the plans, we've got the roadmaps, it's the action that's needed now. If we just keep on spending our time doing more and more roadmaps, and we're not getting anywhere. So I think groups like you are absolutely needed. And I think we've seen across the industry now that, you mentioned it before, we had ACAN on, we spoke to Letty, the action that can come from, which is pretty much these voluntary groups, is immense. How do people get involved with Zero Next? And almost, what do you need? What's the additional skills that you need to take yourselves to the next level?
So we always pride ourselves and Zero Next, but also Zero, in being a very diverse, very inclusive environment and group of people from different backgrounds, different roles within the industry that can all add value and unique value. So as Tasha said, we're working on a playbook at the moment, and that is going to be a result of the working groups that have been put in place now. There's 6 different working groups. I'm personally in 3 of them. And as a Zero Next member, it can be quite intimidating because we're the youngest people there. So we're often kind of afraid of saying what we think and speaking up. But I think that's going to get easier as the working groups go along. And it's been so cool and so refreshing to be involved in something like this, because we're not only we know what the problem is, and now we've taken it one step further and we've stopped sort of complaining and we've started acting, and we're actively looking for solutions together. We're brainstorming and we're slowly working towards finding what the industry actually needs.
I think it's so interesting, and I totally agree with you that there's a real level of frustration, particularly the younger professional levels in the business. And I couldn't agree more that some of the most amazing ideas and innovations, and particularly the startups that we work with and that we talk to on FutureX, those guys are coming straight out of university with some game-changing solutions to sustainable materials and sustainable technologies and processes. So I absolutely applaud the sort of the convening of a network of really enthusiastic, passionate younger people. And I agree what you said before around it being a safe space. I think that has been lacking. It's a really encouraging thing to know that there is a safe space for the younger professionals to get together and really start to affect some real action, some real change. So what have you guys got planned or in the pipeline in terms of the things that you want to address, the action that you want to take?
So actually, Giulia, this might be new, but new news to you. But James and I were just talking about what our plan is as Zero Next separately to Zero. And I think actually what we've decided is, so we would like to start presenting our vision of the future and kind of drawing from all of the knowledge of all of the people who might have been in the industry for a bit longer and kind of pulling from that and adding to it and being able to present at conferences what we want industry to look like. And I think that kind of what we want industry to look like, not in 2050, we mean in 5 years' time, we want industry to start changing, and we want to be able to tell people and explain to people how we can do that and how we can make those changes now that will start kind of moving towards a better world. We've got a couple of events lined up over the next couple of weeks. This is where I'm going to completely forget everything. But so next Wednesday, Owen and I are attending a ACOST-E event, their annual conference in Birmingham. We've also got a couple of awards dinners and also kind of socials with Zero. So we've got a whole load. And then actually, so on the chat that James and I were just having, James was talking about introducing a Zero conference next. So we're kind of really solely focused on us. And that will be in about a year's time as well.
You're obviously welcome to come along.
Yeah, please do.
We'll be there. And I undoubtedly see you guys at Futurebuild 23 as well. You'll be in good company with Akan and Letty and the other guys that are going to be there. So it'll be wonderful to sort of engage more people. I've noticed that you guys have received bits of funding from sort of BIM and data related companies. That's quite new in terms of groups that have come together, and the focus on data is quite interesting as well. Is there a focus on data, or is it just a coincidence that Giulia's into data science and that there is some funding in the data space? Because that could be a real USP of you guys.
So Zero, the background of lots of the people in Zero, as I mentioned earlier, is in a kind of digital sphere. And I think that lots of the people that are involved in Zero and were involved at a really early stage were quite digital. I think that the future of construction is probably going towards a much more digital space. And Giulia can probably talk a little bit more about that because Giulia is in that space at the moment.
Yes, so one of the working groups is actually solely focused on data, and that's the one where I'm most active in, I must say. Not only because I'm very interested in data, I'm a data nerd, but also because my work at innDex is based on data. We have reinvented the way that our clients can measure carbon, and that is already disruptive enough. Think what we can do when we all put our minds together within Zero and Zero Next, and we'll be able to drive real change. There's always three things in my vision to accurate carbon capturing and then reducing, and it's measuring, baselining, and planning. Taking a step back, look at what we've been doing right, what we've been doing wrong, and learn from our mistakes. We need to humble ourselves, take a reality check and say, we've been doing this wrong. And you can't do it without data. And I think, as Tasha said, everything transitioning towards digital, hopefully sooner than later, data will play the key role into this transition.
I think it's fundamental. I mean, you know, we talked about this before, in that if you're not measuring something, how can you improve it? And actually, I probably share your frustration with roadmaps to a certain extent, in that we don't need to redefine the problem one more time. You know, we don't need to go back over the solution one more time. What we need to do is start to measure, start to monitor, start to baseline, start to build our improvements and our action plan around how we're going to improve from an evidence base. And the only way we can do that is through digital, through data. And it, for me, it gives real potential and real meaning behind the golden thread and behind the National Digital Twin program. You know, we're not creating building information models for the sake of having a building information model. We're creating building information models as the vehicle to measure and monitor and improve towards a goal. And the goal is zero emissions. What is it that you guys are focused on around the data collection then, and around capturing? You know, what kind of measures are you looking to capture?
We are able to create the full carbon story of any project. So we can, with the data from the workforce inductions, we can calculate their mode of transport to and from work, how long they take, and their carbon emissions into traveling to work and from work. We do the same for plant and materials. And then we have mid-layer integrations with Department for Transport, DVLA, and Google Maps to calculate all of that. And then with external systems, we calculate the actual carbon footprint of the materials and plant telematics. We integrate with BIM data to accurately predict embedded carbon with the digital twins. So it's very relevant to what you said earlier on. And this just enables clients to make decisions on the building solutions, the location of the supply chain, which also has an important role into fighting the skills crisis that is ongoing in the industry. And that tells you how you can improve your methods of construction and base your decision on accurate embedded carbon data, so you can actually drive change and reduce your carbon footprint per project.
I think, I mean, just going back to the kind of roadmaps comment, actually this whole measuring and kind of obtaining the data, lots of companies now are saying that they're going to reduce their kind of carbon footprint and their carbon spends by 2050. But I bet that lots of the companies that are saying that aren't actually measuring exactly what their carbon footprint is right now. So how do they know that they're going to be able to halve it or get rid of it completely in whatever time frame they're offering? And I think that's something that Zero is pushing for, as well as innDex, is the kind of measuring, creating baselines so that you know what you're doing now, so that then we can work to improve it.
I find it really fascinating because, you know, you're talking a little while ago about, you know, Zero now 400 or 500 members. We had Acon on, which is into the thousands. You've got the UK GBC now over, you know, 800 corporate members. We're all talking and we all want the same thing, but there's obviously big barriers to this change. What are you finding those barriers to be, and, you know, what do we need to do to address them?
I think, I mean, this is where my really cynical view of like money talks, and it's something that every conversation we have within the kind of leadership space with the Zero workshops, but also actually at MBS, no one wants to take the risk of doing something innovative the first time. Everyone loves the idea of talking about it, loves the idea of putting it in, and then they go, let me see a case study. And you go, oh no, this is a kind of innovative thing. This is an innovative building system that we've designed as MBS. And people go, oh, have you got any case studies? And we go, well, we've got some small buildings. And they go, oh no, well then, yeah, no, sorry. And actually it's encouraging people to change things and take the risks. And it's kind of, I mean, there's a whole load of like conversations around policy and insurance companies and all of those kind of things in changing the way that we're building and doing things that are kind of new and radical. We have lots of really frustrating conversation about bio-based materials and materials that are combustible. And actually, I mean, so I don't know whether I'm allowed to say this yet, but we had our fire testing yesterday and it went really well. And just because we're using bio-based materials doesn't mean that the building's going to burn. And we've been building with bio-based materials for years and years. It's not innovative to start using timber, but for some reason there's a real resistance in industry to start using kind of these what are considered to be innovative materials.
Yeah, it's definitely something we've noticed in a lot of our work with advanced material startups, because a huge proportion of them are bio-based or adopting biogenic construction methods. And actually, one of the biggest hurdles, particularly in the UK market space, is that testing and certification around fire. I mean, what's very interesting is that we're now seeing some of the big standards and certification bodies come to the table and are actually talking to us around, well, how can we create accelerators for standards and certification in this space? Because it's something that we recognize as being so important. But you're right, it's about trying to raise awareness across the industry, which I think is quite a challenge, and reduce the risk and increase the viability of using these new materials in projects and demonstrated projects and pilot schemes. And monitor, again, coming back to the data side of things, monitoring and measuring and seeing how they perform.
We were talking about adopting more scientific methods to tackle the problem. And that's exactly what we need to do, in my opinion, because scientific methods are based on trial and error. If we, as you said, if we don't take the risk, we won't be able to know what needs improving. And if we don't know what needs improving, we can't change it. It's always going back to change, isn't it?
Yeah, I think one of my frustrations is that, you know, these innovative products or you know, new ways of building, or actually some of them aren't even new ways of building, seem to be on the exemplar projects. And they shouldn't be exemplar because these are scalable solutions that could quite easily come in. And now, you know, I think as an industry, we're very torn. You know, some say, well, bring in more red tape. You know, should we, you know, to bring in these more eco initiatives, etc. But at the same time, then we want less regulation. So it's sort of finding that mid-ground about how do we accelerate the use of these construction technologies that are scalable and are available now.
We talked about that earlier today, didn't we, Martin? In that actually, if we don't initiate that change in the construction sector ourselves, it'll be initiated for us by ESG investment funds and you know, these huge influxes of money that are coming into the space to push these new products. And on top of that, from the other side, by insurers and insurance companies who are wondering, you know, why aren't you attempting to use the latest materials? Why aren't you engaging with these new solutions when we know they are a solution to address the problem that we're facing?
So something we talk about quite a lot is this idea of giving carbon value, and whether it's in a carbon tax or whatever. It's so one of the really early kind of zero slides that I saw was comparing the cost. If I said, how much does a cup of coffee cost? You probably all say £3, £3.50, £4, wherever you are. If I said how much carbon is in a cup of coffee, so it's about knowing the value of the carbon behind what we're doing, and actually bringing awareness to that through whatever tools that we're using. Hopefully we will then start, whether it gives it a financial value or whether it's just understanding the value, hopefully we can then see the impact that we're having kind of on the face of it.
This comes back to the going off grid with Bill Dunster episode that we did, and you know, one of Bill's big asks was, why don't just give everything one number? Just give it one number and have that number be the amount of time it'll take to pay it off in terms of carbon. So you know, that laptop will be 56. That'll be the amount of activity or time that it would take to pay that carbon back. So give everything that carbon number that's really simple. It's almost like the nutritional printout that you see on food. For your
I was
reference.
exactly going to say that. We should learn to count carbon like we count our calories. We're so good at it and it's so easy. Why can't we do the same?
Would you say there's a better carbon literacy, in your network than there is maybe some of the older networks?
I would probably say no, but I don't think, because I don't think it really exists anywhere. I think there's a bigger awareness that we've got to be careful, but I don't think people could actually attribute kind of kilograms of CO2 used or embodied in a particular thing. I don't know, Giulia, whether in your network it's better than it is in mine.
No, I completely agree with you, actually. In fact, one of our mission, or maybe even our main mission in Zero Next, is to educate. Just because we can learn to quantify the problem itself, and then we can put our heads together to solve it. We know the magnitude on a general level, but it all leads back to data. I hate to be that person, but it does.
No, but yeah, I think you're right. You often see, we used the example in the past that it's about putting a number to something and seeing if it sticks and seeing if people agree with it. And if they don't agree with it, fine, let's refine it. Let's make it better and let's understand how it's calculated. And I think something, and I've talked about this previously as well, but something that came out of our episode on the Deep Green Biotech Hub with our friend Peter Ralph from University of Technology Sydney, these guys totally changed my view of carbon in that actually it might not be about eradicating carbon, but it might be about seeing carbon as having a distinct value. It's an asset that actually we don't, it's a valuable asset that we don't want to plow into the ground or lock into the earth. Well, actually, we need to capture it in various ways and use it.
I thought it's fascinating today. And Giulia, you made this point around the use of paper. Making those small changes can have a huge impact. And we had Duncan Baker-Brown present at our event today, and he was talking about actually if you took your foundation concrete and if you just reduced it by 50 millimeters, you would save the same amount of carbon as giving up meat for a year. And I think when you put it into that context and those small changes can have huge effects. And I think that's something as the built environment, we've got a responsibility to start looking at, as those every small changes on a project can have a huge problem. But I think again it comes back to that carbon literacy. You've got to put it into a context that people understand.
So we've talked about a few of the places that people can come and see you guys speak and engage with you. Where can we find out more information, and how do people get more involved with Zero Next?
So Zero Next actually doesn't have a massive online presence, which is something that we're working to change. Yet, exactly. That's Giulia's job. But in terms of getting involved, sending me or Giulia a message on LinkedIn or Zero Construct, or any of the Zero Construct guys. There's also a membership form on Zero's website. And when you fill in that membership form, I think you have to put in your birthday and maybe tick that you want to be a Zero Next member. And then I get that information, and then I will invite whoever's interested to our weekly meetings. And it's a conversation we have quite a lot about. The more people, the better. The more knowledge, the more. Everyone has a different background. Everyone has a slightly different view. And actually having all of that all together is really interesting. There's something weird in the construction industry. People tend to work in silos. So there's this there's this relationship between architects and contractors, and they always tend to not like each other. But actually, if contractors fed back to architects and architects spoke to contractors a bit more, it might be an easier relationship, and we might build better buildings. So within Zero Next and Zero generally, it's about kind of bringing everyone and everyone's expertise together and learning from it.
Yeah, there's real power in that diversity, isn't there? In terms of, I think you're right. It's so interesting. Maybe it's getting a group of young professionals together who aren't ingrained in the siloed thinking and the mentality that currently exists in the construction sector, and actually just want to go at a problem together with a shared mission, and also an unbelievably diverse range of skills and backgrounds and capabilities. I think it's really powerful. I think people should absolutely be seeking you guys out and signing up.
And so your weekly meetings, what format do they take?
So it's every 2 weeks we meet, currently on a Wednesday at 7:00, and they're all online on Teams. But we are now, I'm really keen that we start meeting in person. I think you can get a whole lot kind of thrashed out in person. It's a lot easier to chat in person. And I think our first official Zero Next social is on the 5th of August. But we've got a Zero social with a kind of wider group, which is on the 20th of July. So it's all on Teams at the moment, and it's pretty informal. It's just chatting. And I think we're gonna, with this kind of plan of like planning the future, whatever our ideal future is, I think we'll start splitting off into slightly smaller groups, and there might be a group who are going to look at one particular thing, and a group who will look at social media, and a group who will look at something else. But I think we'll all be working towards that same mission.
Another thing that I think is important to mention, and I feel it's important for me, I might be wrong, but the aim of Zero Next is also to make the construction industry attractive for young talent to join. Because before I got my job, I had no idea about what the construction industry was. I just thought it was buildings and people making buildings, but there's so much more to it. And now I don't see myself working anywhere else. And still to this day, when I talk to people, they're, oh, what do you do? Oh, I work in construction. They go like, really? That's a bit boring. And I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about. So it's raising awareness about construction is cool. Come and see for yourself.
I've said to Martin and others frequently, I think construction is probably one of the most exciting sectors to be in globally right now, with the amount of impact and potential impact that we can have on improving people's lives, but also improving the health of people, but the health of the planet as well. And it's just cool. There's so much stuff going on. There's so much stuff around materials, around digital, around social. So I totally echo your comments there, Giulia. We usually wrap this up by asking our guests about their vision of the future and what do you want to see. And you might use the Zero Next vision, but let's hear it from you guys firsthand. So Tasha, what kind of future do you want to see?
So I touched on this earlier. I'm really interested by the whole kind of like build less, build clean, build clever. I think we need to start looking at what we're building, and we need to start saying, do we need it? Is it necessary? Is it well designed? Are we optimizing every element of the design? I think we, at the moment, we build buildings like there's no tomorrow. We are building so much, and we cannot carry on. We can't carry on building as much as we're building, and we have to build sustainably. We have to build using sustainable bio-based materials and sustainable techniques that use less carbon. So I guess my vision for a future is optimizing what we're building and building clean, building bio-based.
And Giulia?
Mine is more around, I want to see an incentive towards driving carbon reduction. Like, we can all be pledging that we need to reduce it, but how do we actually reward and penalize the industry for what they're doing well and what they're doing badly? And yeah, more young people in the industry, more fresh minds, young talent. I'm all about it. I can't wait to see what happens in the next 3 to 5 years with Zero Next and the industry as a whole. It's really exciting. Brilliant.
Well, that was absolutely fantastic speaking to you both. And, again, we just really implore the listeners of the podcast to get along to some of your meetings and
Definitely.
Oliver, fantastic to hear from Tasha and Giulia all about Zero Next. I mean, that's a real movement that's happening at the moment.
I think the things that came through for me from Tasha and Giulia was the levels of passion, the levels of enthusiasm, the fact that they've managed to, through Zero Next, galvanize an entire proportion of the industry and young professionals who've really got valuable things and insights and innovations to help us drive towards a net zero future, but maybe don't have the platform, don't have the network yet to be able to do it. So Zero Next is filling that gap perfectly. And it was dead encouraging to speak to them about that. I think another thing that they talk about, which we're incredibly passionate about, and we've covered a lot on this episode, is just the absolute critical need to utilize data to monitor, to baseline, and then to improve upon. So fantastic conversation, some really great insights, and a great pair that are really pushing a good agenda with Zero Next there.
Absolutely. And I think, it shows the passion. And I think what's great about Zero Next is that they've really got that direct line of communication between the young professionals and the more experienced members of the industry. And there's that real collaboration now of driving real action as well. So, it'll be exciting of what comes out of that as outputs over the next few years. If you want to get involved, obviously, they told you where to get in touch. So please do that. Likewise, if you have enjoyed the FutureX episode, please like, share, and subscribe. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks.
Join our community to stay up to date with all things FutureX. Visit futurebuild.co.uk to sign up. Please also like them and share them to help grow our community. You can subscribe to the podcasts within your favourite podcast platform. Thanks so much for listening, and we hope you'll be back again soon.